Introducing the M3 Grease Gun. This iconic SMG has just been added to Battlefield 5 today. And before we get into the nitty gritty of it, I wanted to show you a few tricks that it's got up its sleeve. Technically, this is the first gun in the multiplayer game that has a removable suppressor on it. The Commando Carbine was the first suppressed weapon, but that suppressor is permanently on there and cannot be removed. The Grease Gun, however, offers you the choice. At level 4 on the specialization tree, you can choose to add a suppressor or opt for less vertical recoil. On the surface, the suppressor doesn't seem to offer much of a benefit, seeing as firing your gun doesn't affect the minimap in this game at all. So you might think, well, all this is going to do is give me a lower audio profile and maybe I'll look a bit cooler when I could have less vertical recoil. So what's the point? Firstly, I didn't know this at all, as it was just never explained in the game, but did you know that in BF5, if you hit someone with a suppressor, they won't see a damage direction indicator? Let me demonstrate. So my friend Hads here is shooting me with the Grease Gun, and at the moment it doesn't have a suppressor on it, and you can clearly see the damage indicator correctly displayed on my screen and making me aware of his location. But if we were to try that again with the suppressor on, let's see what happens. No damage indicator. Interesting. So that would give you quite a tactical advantage if the enemy hasn't seen you. And that kind of thing will be really good for ambush kills when you're hiding in some foliage maybe, or a dark building. In terms of the audio difference, well, let's take a look or a listen to that too. Here are some comparisons at various distances away: 10, 20, 30 and 40 meters. So there is a bit of a difference there, and it is quieter, but still audible. I think what DICE have done here is opt for a more realistic sounding suppressor rather than your typical Hollywood GoldenEye pew pew pew. And with it being a bit quieter, you may or may not pick that one out of the crowd in a battle when there's a ton of ambient noise going on around you. And remember, the sound of it will also change depending on what kind of environment you're in. How is it in practice then in a real game? Is this actually a competitive weapon? Well, after the release of the Type 2A submachine gun, you would be forgiven for thinking that you'd never need to use another SMG again. It's fair to say that the Type 2A is a very good weapon and it's just dominating the game in the kill feed right now. But with the Grease Gun being kind of iconic, will it be able to tempt you based on its stats? And a lot of you may be asking, well, why is it called the Grease Gun? Where did it get that name from? It's actually quite simple. It's because of the resemblance to an actual grease gun, a tool that's used by a mechanic. And this gun was chambered in 45 ACP rounds, and that's the same rounds that are fired by the Thompson, but the Grease Gun was lighter and cheaper to produce, but apparently less accurate. I think if I asked most people which weapon they thought was more accurate in real life out of the Thompson and the Grease Gun, I imagine most people would say the Grease Gun. The weapon was designed as a replacement for the Thompson, but it only started to enter the front line in mid-1944 of World War II, and due to delays in its production, it actually saw fairly limited combat in the war. Later variants were used quite often though in the Korean War and future conflicts. But going back to that suppressor, having used it in game a bit and come up against people who were using it too, I would say that in reality, it isn't really that useful because it's a close range weapon and you're really unlikely to be shooting enemies that are beyond 40 to 50 meters anyway, when maybe it would make a difference. So the chances are that you'll both be able to see each other as enemies anyway. Having said that, on maps like Arras or especially the new Pacific maps, a suppressed weapon can really come into its own, especially when enemies are not getting any indication of where they shot from, as demonstrated at the start of the video, because there's a lot of foliage, trees and bushes that you can hide in on those maps, and if you're lying prone, there's even a better chance that enemies are not going to work out where you are and where they're being shot from. And I think it would be great if DICE would start talking about some of these little extra benefits to weapons that players might not know exist. I think it would be quite useful. Even when the BAR came out a few weeks ago, not anywhere on that weapon did it say this weapon does slightly more damage when you use the slower rate of fire. Sure, players in the know who watch a lot of YouTube videos or spend a lot of time on Reddit or looking at stats would know that, or maybe they've picked up the information from somewhere else, but casual players, the average player, wouldn't have ever actually known that, and it seems weird that it's not outlined somewhere on the weapons page. But having played with it for a few hours today, I found the grease gun really fun to use. The sound and animations of this gun make you feel as though it really packs a punch. And at medium range I found it quite satisfying to use. The gun does bounce around a bit more at range, especially when you start hitting that 30 to 50 meters location, but that's to be expected with an SMG. Up close and personal you may struggle a bit more because the gun only has a 450 rate of fire, even though it's a 3 bullets to kill within 10 meters. It's quite punchy, but we all know with the release of the Type 2A, rate of fire is a massive benefit when you're playing in close quarters, which is where a lot of the fights happen in Battlefield 5. In fact, during my time playing with the grease gun, I'd say that the Type 2A was the weapon I was probably killed by the most. But despite that, I can still see myself playing with the grease gun regularly, mainly because it just sounds and feels great to use, and after spending a lot of time using the Type 2A, it's quite nice going back to a gun that's perhaps a little bit more challenging to use, where you've got to maybe operate at a different engagement distance, and headshots will really help you out with this one too. Hipfire, well, it isn't all that great either, but there are some specs that can help you out with that. The good news though is that if you want to unlock this gun, it's quite easy to get. This week's Tides of War challenge mainly focuses around medic play and simply capturing objectives. You've got to get 3 objectives and then get some kills, heal some teammates, get a melee kill, capture some more objectives, and you're good to go. A few quick tips though: squad conquest is great for getting the capture points done really quick, as most of the play is essentially both teams going around in a big circle between the objectives. Also, the bayonet does count as a melee weapon, so if you find it, it's the easiest way to get a melee kill if you're struggling. So when it comes to those specializations, we've already covered the most important ones, and I went for the improved ADS speed, but then your route is really dependent on how you want to use this gun. Either choose the right side for better aimed accuracy or left for better hipfire. It just all depends on your playstyle. The last specialization is either the suppressor or the recoil buffer, as I've mentioned, and I wonder if this is something we will see more in the game now. Will more weapons that are added down the line have an option for a suppressor? Perhaps the 2 at the end could turn into 3. There were actually a lot of guns in World War II that had suppressed variants, even though a lot of them were prototypes. I personally would love to see more of them just to offer up a bit more variety. And wrapping things up today, the launch of the grease gun also signals the end of this chapter of Tides of War. This was the last week. Of course, there will be another chapter, we assume, we hope, but no word just yet on when that will arrive or what content will be included in it. But hopefully we'll get more information on that soon, perhaps even some details of the jungle map that's been teased recently. I look forward to checking that out, but as for what comes after that, well, no one knows yet, and I'm surprised that we still don't know what's coming next for the game. The Pacific was undoubtedly a massive hit when it released, but I think fans are definitely longing for more of those iconic World War II experiences. I for one would love to see some kind of announcement soon about the Eastern Front, introducing the Russian army and all of the additional weapons and vehicles and equipment that come with that. The Type 2A, yeah, it's a fun SMG to play with, but it's no PPSH, and it hasn't scratched that itch for me just yet. I'd also love to see more of the American army. Of course, they weren't in the game until the Pacific was released, but I think it's about time in Battlefield 5 that we get Shermans versus Tiger tanks in France. And I know they're really cliche, and yes, they've been done hundreds of times before, but that doesn't stop me wanting to experience the kind of battles like Carentan or Omaha Beach or San Miraglís in a modern Frostbite game. If I were to make a guess, I think maybe introducing the Russians and having maps which feature the Russians and Americans pushing Germany back towards Berlin, ultimately ending the war in Europe. Maybe that's a realistic expectation on how DICE can actually wrap development on Battlefield 5 up. And that's all for today, folks. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this one. If you did, leave a like. If you didn't, a dislike. Subscribe for more, and I'll see you in the next one.